This is a building in the middle of Rome, and it has the name of a kind of city boss called Agrippa, who was responsible for getting it rebuilt, in fact. And we can read his name. And that, of course, is because Roman letters are ones that we use today, and this course is partly an account of how these letters came back into use. But they're not, in fact, Roman characters. They come from letters that were used in Greece, and here's an example a lot earlier than the Pantheon of a Greek inscription on the island of Crete, and it's what we have to call a monoline letter. That is to say, it has no thicks and thins. Some of the letters are quite familiar, the E form and the S form and the A, of course, the alpha. One thing about this particular inscription is that it goes from left to right in the first line, and then from right to left in the next line, and so on, alternating, which was a habit that didn't last for very long. But apart from that, many of these letters are really quite familiar. You're seeing it here in rather fine Cretan sunshine. If you look at one bit of it that was taken away and is now in the Louvre in Paris, it gives you a better idea of the actual size of these letters, but also under the rather grey lighting of a big museum. One other thing that happened to letters in Greece is quite important, and that is that a temple mentioned in this label here was built at a place called Priene in the 330s. And since this is a British Museum label, you can actually see the original in the British Museum. That's where it is. And if you look at the little map on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it's not in what is now Greece, but it's the part of the coast of what is now Turkey. But it was a Greek city. And this temple is important to us because of the inscription added to it. As that label said, the temple was aided or to some extent paid for by Alexander the Great. And there's his name, Basileus Alexandros, King Alexander, above that of the goddess Athene, who is right there in the bottom line. But the shape of the letters is what interests us. It, like the one I've just shown you, it is a monoline. There are no thicks and thins. But if you look at close up, you'll see that it's got each letter has an ending, which we would call a serif. Not a very big one, but serifs had arrived and they didn't go away again anytime soon. So there is a part of the detail of the name of Alexander on that fragment, which is in the British Museum. Why was that ending put on? some people have suggested that this form of writing, cuneiform, which is a word for writing made up of a lot of wedges, wedge-shaped strokes, made by impressing a wooden wedge into a clay tablet, had been around for a very long time indeed. Well, maybe that was an influence. It certainly adds a sort of graphic quality to the cuneiform writing. But let's come back to a monoline letter with serifs. This is a Roman inscription, and it is indeed without any difference between thick and thin. That O in the second line is a sort of geometrical form, but it's got serifs, little end strokes at the end of the lines. And, as I say, they didn't go away anytime soon. But a big change did happen in Roman letters. This is an inscription not that much later, but it has thicks and thins. And that's a form that became very familiar because, of course, it was adopted in the lettering of early printers. And on the whole, a lot of fonts still use a sort of variation of thick and thin. Almost certainly the thicks and the thins were the result of setting out letters with a broad brush. So there is an inscription which we can date because it was painted not long before the town of Pompeii got buried in volcanic ash from the volcano Vesuvius. And in fact, that style of letter was adopted by people cutting letters in stone. And if you compare these two from the inscriptions I've just shown you, you'll see that quite fine details, the angle at which the brush is laid on at the top, the flicking of the brush off to the right at the bottom right-hand corner. These are very, very faithfully reproduced by the stone cutter. So there we have a letter which is very, very familiar to us today. It's a letter that was used on this column of Trajan, which is often used as a model for fine stone-cut letters. And there's no doubt at all that there is the thicks and the thins have some kind of link with those calligraphic brush-drawn letters. I ought to say that he was not the first person to say that Roman lettering comes from the use of a flat brush or some such tool. The man who said this, Letherby, who was a considerable expert on Roman architecture and also was a founder of what became a school of design in London, the Central School, wrote this passage you're seeing here in 1906. And that really was a new idea. If you want to see the Trajan column, you don't have to go to Rome. There is a complete cast of it in plaster in the Victoria and Albert Museum, mostly for the sculpture on it. Frankly, the lettering is not very well shown here, But even so, you can get an idea of that inscription. That thick and thin became a feature of lettering which was revived in the Italian Renaissance. But here's just one other example from the Roman period of the Roman Empire. A very fine one, I think. And these Roman inscriptions were actually the model for others in Italy. Here, for example, we have a calligrapher and a printer of the Italian Renaissance in Verona who copied Roman letters, and that was one way in which they got into printed fonts. Well, there we are. We'll come to Feliciano and also to this example. Here is a French type maker of the end of the 16th century, Le B, making letters of which the capital letters are, of course, very, very close to the stone-cut lettering we've just been looking at. If you want to see the variety of Roman stone-cut letters, this is a book worth looking for. Hübner. It's online. It happens to be written entirely in Latin, but the point of showing it to you here is it has a huge number of, I think, very, very finely drawn examples of Roman inscriptions, and it gives you a very nice idea of the variety of these letters.